Welcome back, everybody, to Left Reckoning. Joined as always by Matt Leck. Actually, I need to stop saying that because that's not true. Actually, a lot of times
I know, yeah,
Matt is not here or I'm not there. But joined preferably by my good friend Matt Leck. Thank you for being here, brother.
It's good to be here.
And we're stoked to be joined today by Luke Savage, who's a writer at Jacobin, author of the Dead Center. If you missed that conversation we did a little while back, you should definitely go and revisit that conversation and buy the book. Luke, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Cheers. It's great to be back.
Well, I mean, you're a fun person to talk to about the topic we're going to get into today, which is, our boy Donnie Trump and Meatball Ron and who the GOP is sort of going to be backing. And it's interesting. I'm curious what you think about this because we've been getting a lot of stuff that I think is very astroturfed. Like, every once in a while we'll get like right wingers like showing up in like our YouTube comments about something, but there's something about Ron DeSantis. Like, even if we put it in like the meta text, right? Like not even in the title, our comments will just be flooded with all of these pro Ron DeSantis things. And like, maybe I'm wrong. He has a huge like online following. But there's something about that sort of smells funny to me. But I'm curious, just generally, like, watching this potential 2024 like showdown develop, what your first level thoughts are on it.
Well, I think there's an obvious context for everything that's happening right now, and that's that Republican elites are kind of dancing a very, precarious and difficult dance around the nomination. For two reasons. I mean, one is because, or really, I suppose it's really just one reason, which is that, Donald Trump is not their first choice, but he has his finger on the pulse, still has his finger on the pulse, and has for some years now on, the Republican base. Donald Trump, I think it's safe to say, has a connection to the GOP electorate that is unprecedented as far as I can tell, at least in modern electoral history. He's not just somebody that they like and that is kind of widely seen as, a tribune for conservative ideas. He's somebody who has a kind of deep emotional attachment that I think goes beyond anything we've ever seen. I mean, if you think about it, when has there been another example of a figure who has, had the trajectory Trump initially had, which involved overcoming the, opposition from virtually the entire GOP establishment, as well as the mainstream media, to win the nomination, go on to win the presidency under, equally difficult circumstances, lose re-election, and then 4 years later, been the presumptive nominee for the nomination 4 years after the election that he lost. I don't think there's another example of that. And so, I think what's happening right now is that there is a astroturfed is the right word, I think, attempt to kind of boost Ron DeSantis because Republican elites would be more comfortable with DeSantis. And I think, frankly, liberals would be as well, because I think there just is a part of the American liberal psyche at this point, which sees Donald Trump as an evil so singular and exceptional that literally anyone, even, Meatball Ron, would be preferable. So I think that's the basic background of what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I don't know. I find that game to be really dangerous. To be picking, which devil you want to dance with, and like Ron DeSantis, has been pretty brutal as the governor of Florida, and what's scary, for me here in Texas too, is like how it's funny because like he's just like not on the short list, but he wants to be. Greg Abbott here. Him and DeSantis have been having like this like evil off, right? This competition to be like who could be the most cruel character in politics. And Scott Braddock, one of the good like Texas journalists, had like a pretty, like, it's a joke, but it's serious. Like, if you want to be able to tell the future about what's going to happen in Texas, like, you need to subscribe to the Miami Herald, right? In the sense that like Ron DeSantis will do something about trans kids in schools. Abbott will get into it. They'll start talking about the border and busing people. DeSantis, sends people to San Antonio, right? So even beyond who might potentially be the president, like the way that the Republicans are trying to vie for like their base right now, this competition like has like a lot of real serious like human consequence in the short run.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think that there are signs already that the Republican nomination is going to be. I mean, it's hard to say uglier than 2016, because it's like every Republican presidential nomination is ugly in terms of the things that the candidates say. I mean, going back before 2016, I remember when Ron Paul got applause for saying that like people who don't have health insurance deserve to die or whatever it was. But I think we are going to see a really dangerous and corrosive arms race between DeSantis and Trump, particularly around the rights of transgender people. And I think that's very, very dangerous. I also think that even though I think I'm of the view that Trump is going to be a much stronger candidate for the nomination than DeSantis, I do think that he has kind of lost some of his mojo from 2016 in a sense. I mean, I think that we saw in the midterms, the Republicans went all in on a strategy that I don't think it was entirely Trump derivative. I think it was also very libs of TikTok derivative, and in many, in some ways DeSantis derivative as well. But Trump, was very much preparing to come out and take credit for what was supposed to be a Republican landslide, and that didn't happen. And I think that one of the things you can point to for why that didn't happen, and one of the signs of weakness that Trump is showing, but I think the Republican Party is showing more generally, is just how much investment there still is in election fraud, conspiracies surrounding 2020 and things like that. I mean, Donald Trump in 2016 was constantly talking about how, like, when I'm president, we are never going to stop winning, right? You're going to get sick of winning. And then after 2020, all he's talking about is how much of a loser he is, right? They stole the election. And, I don't think that resonates in quite the same way. And I mean, years out from an election that you lost, still talking about it, still making that an issue, that's not going to work.
That's so fascinating. That part is so fascinating to me because yes, he's a loser, and this is partially why like the Republican establishment is really having a problem with him. But none of them can even admit that. Like none of them can actually say he lost. It's an article of faith that like there was something going on. Whether you limit it like the sort of like haute couture conservatives, which is like big tech censorship stole the election, or it's actual ballots were stuffed. They can't admit that this guy is a loser, and it's because of how much he engages liberals.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans, I think, have a very kind of fraught and difficult relationship with their base. That is, Republican elites do. And I think it's different qualitatively from the relationship that exists between Democrats and their base. On the one hand, the Republicans, I think, draw tremendous kind of, electoral strength from their base because, they're happy to get their base riled up and throw it red meat in a way that's highly motivating, at least to the kinds of people who, Republican messaging appeals to. On the other hand, the base often invests itself. There's all this talk right on when it comes to Democrats. It's not always untrue, but there's a lot of talk about how, Democrats lose elections because, they're invested in these kind of like fringe, often it's some kind of, vague conception of wokeness that gets blamed, whatever, these kind of fringe concerns that don't appeal to the median American voter. I think that happens more arguably on the right, frankly. I mean, the Republicans, I think, blew the midterms in a big way because at a time of record inflation, they went and they were going door to door canvassing on drag time story hour. And unless you have an investment, a deep kind of like perverse, disgusting, grotesque investment in the kinds of issues, a Ron DeSantis or a Greg Abbott is pontificating about, like, that's not going to resonate with you. I don't know if you guys watched the State of the Union a few weeks ago, but I thought Sarah Huckabee Sanders' response was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Biden comes out there and he gives, what is in some ways a characteristic Biden speech, but in other ways, is more kind of more heavily kind of emphasizing, economic issues and even in qualified ways criticizing corporate power, things like that. And then Sarah Huckabee Sanders comes out and gives this response that really seems like a response to a speech Biden hadn't made. She's these weird, almost kind of cult-like flourishes about like we are sick of worshiping their flag and their totems and their idols and stuff like that. And it's all, it's all DeSantisism. It's all, school choice and, all these kind of other things that, and, teachers indoctrinating children, all this other stuff that the Republican base is obsessed with. And like, that's a sign that like the Republican base and its concerns can be a significant weakness as well as sometimes a strength. And I think that's part of the dynamic right now as well.
I want to bring up like this dynamic between, I think that's probably how they're going to frame it is, Trump's off on this frivolous stuff and DeSantis is the policy wonk guy. But like, as we just discussed, like DeSantis's actual policies are just this gas, like you said, distraction shit. Meanwhile, Trump is out here and there's some of this like that we can get into that's culture war stuff. But the first line of this truth interests me. Ron DeSanctimonious, and he retweeted himself on this. Ron DeSanctimonious wants to cut your Social Security and Medicare, and then he gets closed up Florida in its beaches. A sidebar, like they seem to be kind of like out unresponsible in each other on COVID. And then it mentions of Paul Ryan and the people he beat in 2016, basically. But I, like that part is interesting because like Trump, I think once especially he realizes like the what was happening in Maricopa isn't going to animate people. He is going to flip just opportunistically to things like this. And like, there's a reason Biden's talking about Social Security and there's a reason like Trump is going to be like, I want some of that too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to underscore that Trump's strengths, such as they were as a candidate in 2016, I think really came from, what separated him from a conventional Republican politician, which like I think in many substantive ways, Trump actually is just a pretty conventional Republican politician in terms of like what his practical commitments are and what his instincts were when he was governing. But as a candidate, and just kind of rhetorically, Trump does have this tendency at certain moments to, speak about things like Social Security in ways that are pretty atypical, I think, of Republican politicians in the past. I'll quote something Corey Robin wrote in 2018 here. He was talking about Trump's 2016 campaign, and he wrote, Trump's critique of plutocracy, defensive entitlements, and articulated sense of the market's wounds were among the most noteworthy innovations of his campaign. I really think that's true, and it's one of the things that is potentially going to make Trump a stronger candidate than DeSantis, not only in the general election, but I think in the primaries as well. I mean, if Republican voters could simply be like, if they were satisfied just hearing kind of conventional like feral Republican messaging, they would have just gone with Ted Cruz or somebody like that in 2016. They went with Trump for a reason, and or for reasons, and those reasons might be complicated, but I certainly think one of them, in addition to his personality, is his ability to speak in ways like the Truth Social post you just quoted.
Yeah. And like, I will say like, that's not a consistent theme. Trump will also go the other direction and be like, oh yeah, we have to punish women who get abortions. But yeah, he would do that thing. Like we can't leave people dying in the street for lack of healthcare.
I mean, I want to make sure that we're focusing on the real issues, but I also think stylistically that DeSantis has set himself up for a pretty bad time. We have, this kind of like, while Trump is sort of back and forth too on whether or not he's doing Ron DeSantis, which is the new one, which just like doesn't even mean anything, which is sort of awesome. It's like self-referential, right? or the meatball. So like, who knows what version of Trump we'll get? But I think even like 30% Trump. We'll be able to walk the floor with this guy. This is Ron sort of responding to some of the heat that he's been getting from Trump and Trump-affiliated folks.
I spend my time delivering results to the people of Florida and fighting against Joe Biden. That's how I spend my time. I don't spend my time trying to smear other Republicans. That's right.
And that's why you're going to lose, because people like the Trump during the debates, just smashing everybody on stage ruthlessly.
I mean, that to me is just that to me is just pure like Jeb Bush energy. I mean, I don't want to use the phrase in DeSantis's defense, but let's say in DeSantis's defense, he is in a bit of a predicament here, and it's a revealing predicament or an instructive one. He can't attack Donald Trump directly because the Republican base loves Donald Trump, and that's a really risky bargain for him. So his whole campaign is going to have to be hamstrung by kind of not attacking Donald Trump or only attacking Donald Trump in very qualified ways and trying to present himself as this kind of perfect compromise candidate. And Trump he's not hamstrung by those things at all. He's going to go all out. And he's already going all out. I hadn't heard about like Ron DeSantis, which like the Kofifi of Ron DeSanctimonious is that. I don't know what that means, but it's like it does sound like Latin. But yeah, Trump clearly has Trump clearly has like a lot more in his arsenal than DeSantis. And I would add, actually, just as an addendum to what we were just saying about Trump, his these kind of unique properties he has as a Republican politician. For me, the thing that defines DeSantis the most is how invested he is in a sort of day-to-day way in whatever like the online right specifically is talking about. So I saw some Republican, like some DeSantis partisan recently, attacking Trump, and he had a DeSantis clip and he was like, well, Trump is talking about, Trump is insulting people, Ron DeSantis is fighting ESG or something.
Yes.
Like, ESG, if you don't binge watch like right-wing media all day, you're going to have no idea what that is. I mean, like ESG is like, this is like the latest Republican kick. It's kind of very similar. It's like woke capital adjacent. It's this idea that like BlackRock and like big finance is like, they're minimizing shareholder value by leaning into wokeness or something. But it's like, unless you consume right-wing media all the time, you have no idea what that is. And like Donald Trump, I think, is able to channel the weird, often fringe concerns and rhetoric favored by the Republican base in a way that like doesn't come off always as like weird and niche. And DeSantis just can't help himself. He's just, to me, this is like when you see like liberal commentators complaining about Chapo Trap House or something,
Yes.
and just like getting very mad about like things that, in the grand scheme of things, like not that many voters, know what they are.
Yes, no, this is a great tweet. I think this is from David Sachs, venture
Can you
capital
remind people
guy.
of who David Sachs is, Matt?
Yeah, he's this guy. He's one of the guys along with like Jason Calacanis that was in that clip of they were talking about like, have you sold your crypto before it was that you're actually allowed to? Because like a pump and dump. These are all venture capital sort of Andreessen Horowitz adjacent charlatans. And he writes, DeSantis takes on ESG while Trump takes on Rihanna. What else do you need to know? And it's like I just said like what ESG is, because like you said, like unless you're like both like on this online all the time and be like an investor, like I don't even think you give a shit unless you're like investing large sums of money. And that's like they're so high on their own supply, and like that's a real problem, I think, because the entire moment of the last like 5 or so years, like Bernie, it's anti-establishment, and Trump won saying like all of these guys, yeah, I bought them, so I'm the one you want to get in here. To be like, no, the party, I don't attack my party, bro. No one's here for that anymore.
Well, I'm glad you showed the tweet because I'd forgotten the other part of it, which is important as well, because David Sachs is complaining. He's like, Trump is taking on Rihanna while, DeSantis is fighting ESG. It's like, sorry, but people actually know who Rihanna is.
Yeah.
like if you ask me to explain why Trump is like always complaining about, like Trump complains about Rihanna, he complains about like Anna Wintour. He has a longstanding like crusade against Bette Midler. I'm forgetting the guy.
He had beef with Diet Coke.
Yeah, right. There's the guy in New York. I'm forgetting who it is. Where Trump has like frequently tweeted about how his Oscar parties are no longer.
Oh yeah,
hot,
it's something.
And like that's just Trump is a showbiz guy or whatever, and like that's weird in its own way. But I would venture a guess that kind of thing resonates more than like ESG or anything like that, which nobody knows what that is.
Yes. No, he was calling little Marco like saying he has a small dick and stuff. It wasn't like he's not strong enough on CRT or whatever the was back then.
No, I do think that like there's something that, I mean, I think you say something like similar to this in your piece in Jacobin, that like, you know, a lot of Trump's like appeal was, you know, like emotional and like not intellectual, and the Republicans like they don't know how to harness that, particularly because I think the kinds of people that are successful within the Republican Party, and in fairness, the Democratic Party too, like aren't really people who are attuned to like the feelings and the general trends in like, you know, the American public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And, you know, in some ways, what's going on right now with the Republican Party, I think is emblematic of like a much longer term decline that's been going on for several decades now. I think really since the Reagan era. And this is kind of the chickens coming home to roost. I mean, you know, I quoted him already, but this is a point Corey Robin was making throughout the Trump presidency. You know, which is that, you know, if you look at Nixon or Reagan, you know, they attracted, you know, there was mass popular appeal. We shouldn't exaggerate it, but I mean, you know, they were able to, you know, win in some cases, you know, majorities behind what they were doing. They were able to create some kind of popular base for the Republican project. Since 1992, the Republican Party has at the presidential level only won the popular vote once in 2004. They've lost it on every other occasion. And, you know, for that reason, I mean, like, you know, you know, there was hope, I suppose, on the right, and you still see it. You know, there's people writing about like the new populist conservatism today. There's hope some people have that like the Republican Party can relaunch itself as some kind of populist formation and you know, and thus reinvent itself as a majority party. I'm very skeptical as to whether that can happen. And so part of what we're seeing on the right at the moment is just this kind of continued fragmentation of American conservatism. The coalition that, you know, kind of George W. Bush inherited and kind of after 9/11 was able to temporarily reinvigorate, coalition of, you know, so-called fiscal conservatives or libertarians, the Christian right, and, you know, neocons invested in, you know, the American empire. It's not really holding together anymore. And I think, you know, increasingly what we're seeing is that the Republican Party is becoming more and more unhelpfully kind of pulled, you know, in unhelpful directions, like, you know, by its base, as the base, you know, adopts a kind of more like minoritarian mindset, right? In the 1980s, you heard, you know, the big, you know, one of the big slogans on the right was the moral majority. And now, you know, when there's recognition that actually there's not a majority that's in favor of these ideas, where are they focusing on? It's the Supreme Court. It's like, you know, they want to defend the Electoral College. Like they, you know, it's all that stuff. So there is a tit for tat going on between, you know, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump at the moment. But I think part of the broader context is this kind of longer term fragmentation.
That's an interesting point. You know, I mean, one of the stranger election demographic outcomes alongside, you know, bear in mind the nature of the electorate in 1960 with Nixon beating Kennedy among women, is Reagan crushed with the youth of Mondale in 1984. Like,
yes.
Age 18 to 24, I got here. 39 to 61, Reagan won. 25 to 29, 43 to 57. 30 to 49, 42 to 58. I mean, wow. I mean, that was a crushing election anyway. But I mean, it's still wild to think about.
I'm really glad you brought that up because there's, I mean, I think there's an assumption people have. You know, like it's captured in that that quote that Winston Churchill like almost certainly didn't say, where it's like, you know, if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative at 50, you have no brain, or whatever it is. But like, I think that captures the conventional wisdom that people just sort of, you know, when you're young, you're radical. And then when you're, you know, older, you're kind of like, you know, you become more conservative as you know, accrue experience and you come to understand the ways of the world. That's just, as far as I can tell, is not actually like concretely true. If you look at the data, not only on Reagan, which you just cited, Matt, but it's true of Margaret Thatcher as well. There was a tremendous youth buy-in for Thatcherism in the British electorate. And so what we're seeing today, where the Republican electorate, tilts, very heavily towards older people. I mean, that was one of the stories. There were several, but that was one of the stories in their, not very good midterm results. And I think, like, unless they have, some brilliant new idea, that trend is only going to accelerate.
Well, I'm curious. To like zoom it out and like maybe looking at 24. I don't know if you've seen this. I talked about it earlier this week on the Griscom stream, which has been, the kind of failure of the Biden administration to sort of show up for certain communities. Like one with Warrior Met Coal, which I just find to just be unbelievably like unforgivable. Strike going on for 23 months. You want to shift, the map for the Democratic Party. Why not show up to that and say, where's the governor? Where are the senators? Where are these people who supposedly represent you? And you're fighting against like New York City based capital, right? The companies that own the coal mine. And now we're seeing it in East Palestine, where the Biden administration has like been very unwilling to talk to it. And Trump was just there. And this is the response.
Thank you, sir. Honor to meet you, sir. Mr. Trump, what do you make about Biden not showing up? You showing up before he did.
It's terrible. He says terrible.
Thank you so much. It's terrible. I totally hate it.
Trump, take a picture of my phone.
It goes on, and there's other stuff of him like at a McDonald's buying people Big Macs and signing hats, but like. Whether or not this is going to be something that can survive like post-Trump, there is like this aspect, I think, of like the Democratic Party that like allows something like this to thrive, where like if Biden and them like had a more significant response, I think the space for Trump to be able to go and make this kind of photo op, is lessened. Because look, the ad here writes itself. Like Biden goes off to Ukraine and Trump goes to the people of East Palestine.
Yeah, and in fact, I have a piece on exactly that, basically advancing that exact case that I think should be out tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And the derailment happened on February the 3rd, and neither Biden nor Pete Buttigieg have visited, which obviously creates an opening for Trump. I
think Buttigieg like showed up like this morning, 20 days late. Not giving him credit, but but he also it took like a lot of like media outrage. People would ask him. I mean, it took him 10 days to even acknowledge it in the first place, right? It's damage control at this point.
And they're all working in concert too, right? Like Buttigieg sees that DeWine hasn't said anything. He knows that he doesn't have to go as far either. And so like this is like, this late comingness. Like 2 days ago, he said, there's these guys just go after profits. And this is what happens. Well, it's like, it would have been nice earlier in this month. Frankly, would have been nice in fucking December.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the team over at Lever News has been hammering Buttigieg in particular on this. And I mean, their reporting makes very clear that, rail safety, or, the diminishment of rail safety is very much a bipartisan thing. The Trump administration, like Buttigieg, his office fired back at Trump's visit and, pointed to the fact that, the Trump administration has scrapped, safety legislation around the railways. But I mean, so did the Obama administration in 2014 after a derailment in New Jersey. Under industry pressure, they built in a bunch of loopholes, to their own safety legislation that they introduced in 2014, which, according to experts cited by the Lever, could have, prevented, or if not prevented, significantly diminished the seriousness of the derailment that happened earlier this month. So, there's a bipartisan problem here, but in terms of the political response, I mean, I don't really have much to add to what you said, Dave. I mean, it's so obvious they've created an opening where there didn't need to be one, and where if you create a situation where somebody like Donald Trump, like a New York billionaire, can come and like stand next to JD Vance, a former venture capitalist, and I think they were at a fire station or something like that, surrounded by all these kind of like blue collar people, and like present himself as like a champion of the community and a hero of the working man. Like, what else? Need I say more?
Yeah. Well, let's just, while we're on this, I want to play this Fox News clip because it is interesting how, to bring back to Trump versus DeSantis, the Murdoch press is going to play this. Trump is already sort of trying to like throw him some high heat to brush him off the plate a little bit. But this is, when it comes from Ducey. Ducey will throw some heat at Trump. Here is
Bill Johnson, the congressman. He said, look, the White House is not here. If you have a question, write it down. Here's my card. Sure. Send it to me, and all the questions will be answered. I will contact the White House.
Right. Speaking of the White House, apparently regulations regarding train safety were changed during the Trump administration. This particular railroad and others lobbied President Trump to dismantle an Obama-era rule that would have required railroads to update their braking systems. And apparently the Obama administration had pushed for it to govern transportation of hazardous materials after about 500,000 barrels of crude were dumped. But ultimately, the Trump administration undid that and said the costs exceeded the benefits. Nobody understands, and you know, when they talk about whether or not it's safe to drink the water.
Yeah, now we'll stop it there. I mean, Trump, that will get back to Trump, and he'll be very upset about that coverage there. But I mean, it's interesting how, like, I mean, the politics of this stuff, it becomes this sort of football where everyone, and that's why like the Democrats are so frustrating, because instead of like saying, well, we got cover and Trump did this, and well, actually the unions were with us in December in this way. Like, that's not really like, that's like trivia basically.
Yeah. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, this is like Biden could have had this photo op that Trump got today, and Trump got it instead. And for most people, that is what they're going to see. So, you know, you can engage in this tit for tat all you want about like who's deregulated, you know, rail safety the most, but like what matters in this moment is optics, and you know, Trump has clearly gotten the edge in that fight, like totally unnecessarily.
Yeah. Well, Luke, I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have to do it sooner than later to get you back on here again. Maybe we can talk some positive stuff instead of focusing solely on the right.
I'm looking at the forecast, David, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Not looking good. But I do appreciate you spending some time with us, Luke, and do appreciate your writing, folks. There'll be links below to read some of Luke's most recent pieces in Jacobin. Also links to Luke's book, which you should definitely read. I think it really sets up, unfortunately, a lot of the difficulties that we're in. Really appreciate you hanging out with us today, Luke.
Appreciate it, guys. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Luke.